Hello, I'm Adam Nova, the Executive Director and Curator of the Historic Indian Agency House in Portage, Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us for Archaeology Kids Camp. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the people who have helped make this possible. Alliant Energy has provided the funds to be able to put this together for you online. Our dedicated volunteers have put in a lot of hours to put the curriculum together. And I'd like to thank you for joining us. Have fun at Kids Camp.
Hi, boys and girls. How many of you have heard the word archaeology? Whenever we hear a word with ology on the end, it means the study of something. For example, biology is the study of living things. Geology is the study of rocks. Ology means the study of something. So what do you think archaeology might be the study of? Archae just means old, or from long ago. So archaeology is the study of old stuff. Why would we want to study old stuff? Archaeologists are scientists who study old stuff in order to learn more about history. Archaeologists want to learn about how people lived in the past by studying the things people left behind. The things people left behind have a name too. They're called artifacts. Artifacts are things that people made or used in the past. Things like arrowheads that Native Americans used for hunting, or buttons from the clothes people used to wear, or even pieces from houses people lived in a long time ago. We can learn more about how people lived in the past by studying artifacts like these. The things that you and I make and use today could even become artifacts that someone might discover 200 years from now. Maybe they'll dig up your old shoes that you threw away last year. Or maybe they'll dig up my cell phone. Those artifacts would help future people understand how you and I live today. Does anyone know what this might be? It's a fossil. A fossil is a plant or animal that was once alive, but it died and was preserved in rock. Archaeologists don't study fossils. Does anyone know what we call the scientists who do study fossils? What kind of ologists are they? Paleontologists study fossils. Paleontologists try to learn all about the plants and animals of the past. But archaeologists don't study fossils. Archaeologists study what? Artifacts. Artifacts are things that people made and used in the past. Artifacts help us learn how people used to live. Archaeologists are like detectives. They put together clues to find answers to their questions, like solving mysteries. Instead of finding a whole clay pot, they might only find a couple of pieces and have to try to figure out what the rest of the pot looked like. Or they might find several strange objects in the ground and have to try to figure out what they are and how they might have been used. Just like detectives, archaeologists find clues and then they try to figure out what those clues actually mean, the story behind them. Let's do a little activity to help us better understand what archaeologists do. In your curriculum guide, you should find a handout that looks like this. We can only see part of the picture. With a crayon, marker, or pencil, take a few minutes to finish the picture so that it looks the way you think it might originally have looked. You can pause this video while you try it. Let's see how you did. Does your picture look like the original? Did you fill in the missing pieces correctly? Or does your picture look different than what it's supposed to look like? Just as each of us might have our own interpretation of what the original picture might have looked like, when archaeologists find clues, they try to interpret how those clues fit together in the story of the past. Often they don't see the full picture, just bits and pieces, just like with your picture. Archaeologists try to make sense of the artifacts they find. That's what interpretation means. Interpretation is explaining the meaning of something. Do you think that an archaeologist's interpretation of artifacts can sometimes be wrong. Even when we think we have something figured out, our interpretation could possibly be wrong. Scientists know all about that. They have to be willing to change their interpretation, if necessary, as more information becomes available. As archaeologists learn more, they understand the big story of the past better. That's the whole goal. Now, sometimes archaeologists have other clues too, such as things people from long ago wrote down. They can read what those people wrote about, and it might help them understand their artifacts better. Sometimes archaeologists can get a good idea of how old an artifact might be too, by looking for patterns and styles. Even today, there are patterns and styles in each time period. Back in the 1970s and early 80s, people wore a lot of polyester clothes, like brightly colored polyester pantsuits. Further back in the 1800s, women wore very long dresses, and men wore top hats. Today, we tend to wear things like jeans, t-shirts, and athletic shoes. If an archaeologist finds a clay pot, he might be able to tell approximately how old it is based on its style, because clay pots were made in different styles during different time periods in history. But a clay pot doesn't talk, or come with a label that says, "I was made in 1789, does it? So interpretations can still end up being wrong. There's a funny fiction book called Motel of the Mysteries about an archaeologist way in the future who digs up a motel that was buried in a catastrophe back in 1985. He uncovers a motel room and interprets the artifacts all wrong. For example, some of the artifacts this future archaeologist finds in the motel room are a faucet, a shower head, and a plunger. However, being so far in the future when things are so different than they used to be, the archaeologist has never seen items like these before. So, he misinterprets them to be ancient musical instruments. Let's do a fun misinterpretation activity.
Here's a great misinterpretation activity you can do with some friends. Choose a common household item, things like a computer mouse or a baseball glove or a large serving fork. You're going to imagine that you're an archaeologist in the future who just dug up these unfamiliar artifacts. You've never seen anything like these before. You need to give your newly discovered artifact a name. Not its real name, but something you make up. Then tell your friends what your artifact was used for long ago. Not its real use, though. You have to make something up. In other words, you need to misinterpret your artifact. Here's my example. This item is known as a fish scoop. Long ago, fish were so plentiful that a fisherman could put on his leather mesh glove and just reach over the side of his canoe to easily scoop up fish for dinner. The leather strings could be adjusted depending upon the size of the fish, while the open spaces allowed the water to drain out as the fish was brought into the canoe. Now you try it. Pick a common object and come up with a misinterpretation of your own. You can pause the video now to try it.
Scientists, including archaeologists, use something called the scientific method in their detective work. The scientific method is just some careful steps scientists take in order to answer a question. Using the scientific method often helps scientists interpret things better. In your curriculum guide, you should find a handout that looks like this. You can have it handy and follow along. Step 1 is to ask a question. What do we want to know? Let's pretend that these puzzle pieces are actually pieces of pottery that I found lying on top of the ground. Maybe my question is, what did these pieces of pottery come from? What did it actually look like? Step 2 is to figure out what we already know and to find out as much as we can. What I know is that these are pieces of pottery. I know that they have a design painted on them. I do a little looking online and at the library, and I find out that archaeologists in this area have dug up similar pieces of pottery that were from ancient bowls. Step 3 is to come up with a hypothesis. Hypothesis is just a fancy word that means to come up with a possible answer to our question. We don't just make a guess. We try to answer our question based on what we already know. My hypothesis, based upon what I already know, is that these pieces came from an ancient bowl. Now, in step 4, it's time to test my hypothesis to see if I might be correct about that. I get permission to do an archaeological dig, where I discovered the pottery pieces. As I dig, I find more pieces that seem to have come from this very same artifact. Okay, so I've asked my question, what did this piece of pottery actually look like? I've thought about what I already know about pottery like this. I've developed a hypothesis. I think these pieces came from an ancient bowl. I've tested my hypothesis by doing an archaeological dig, and I found lots more pieces of what I think is an ancient bowl. Now I'm on step 5. I have to interpret what I found. Interpretation means putting together the clues and coming up with an explanation. I go to the lab and clean the dirt off the pieces. Then I very carefully reassemble the pieces that I found and glue them together with special glue. Wow, this is how it all came together. Was my hypothesis correct? My hypothesis might be partly correct. I found these pieces in a deep layer of earth, so it could be an ancient piece of pottery. I really don't know how old it is. But I thought this pottery would be bowl-shaped. It's not a bowl at all. It's a vase. The final step is to share my results with others so they can learn and continue to test my hypothesis. Archaeologists write reports and often put artifacts on display in museums. Sometimes interpretations need to be changed when we learn more information. As more clues are discovered, our understanding of the big story gets better too. That's why it's important to share what we learn with others. Archaeologists work together to figure out the mysteries of history. Now that we've been introduced to the science of archaeology, let's dig in. Next up in video number 2, preparing to excavate.